And so we saw this critical turn become indeed much more differentiated and complex. And I think part of this sort of socio-cultural, political, critical turn sort of also, not sort of, but did also play out in courts. Certainly in court cases involving schools. Perhaps one of the most famous court cases, and Lyubov, William Lyubov described this case. William Lyubov, who had been had written a number of books, Metaphors We Live By, but also had written quite a bit on black vernacular, was involved in a court case, trying to remember the date of this, in Ann Arbor, where parents of African-American children in Ann Arbor, a group of them, sued the schools for their failure to provide opportunities for their students. And took it for court and indeed won the court case. What was happening in the schools was oftentimes teachers were quick to label kids from a different dialect group as deficit, placing them in classes for kids who were mentally retarded and so on, and taking away from their opportunity to learn. At least that was the decision of the court case. And indeed the court case required of the school that they do professional training of the teachers and shift their practices to provide these students better opportunities. Indeed, you can identify court cases like this that really are part of, I think, this critical turn. And indeed, as you sort of deal with these sort of issues, you'll find a sort of a mix of fairly deep and intense and sometimes abstract theoretical writing by colleagues or scholars like Henry Giroux and Peter McLaren and others. But you'll also find people exploring these issues in the day-to-day. And in schools, in concert with their detailed analyses of these events. Indeed, Peter McLaren has written extensively about the education reform movement as it pertains to his own experiences. Michael Apple, who has always been a person who's focused on literacy, much of his writing has focused on school-related events, particularly pertaining to literacy, looking at it through this quite critical lens, very much informed by sort of a Marxist analysis of who controls what and what becomes the capital that's sort of valued. Also in literacy, what's so interesting about it, I think literacy, like positivism, sort of acted as if it was an innocent in this, that there weren't sort of deep-rooted sort of political infrastructure undergirding it, or an ideology. There was a sort of, as James G. and Street had claimed, there was a concern for the extent to which these people viewed themselves as autonomous. And so part of what took place here was, in a sense, people coming out of their rabbit holes and getting involved, I think, in what proved to be a fairly intense paradigm war. But it oftentimes, when it came down to the reality of schooling and society, it involves deep-rooted prejudices and biases and misguided senses of history tied up with fairly naive, unsophisticated, but dangerous views of society tied up with prejudice and discrimination for purposes of ensuring one's privilege, power, and sense of entitlement. In Australia in particular, I've oftentimes encountered the prejudices of people relative to their views of the relationship of the entitlement of people of different classes and bias against people of certain ingenuities. Interestingly, in Australia, work in this area flourished, and it flourished initially in the 70s at Deakin University in Victoria, where there was a fairly substantial community of critical theorists, and that nexus of influence shifted for a period of time to James Cook University in Townsville in Queensland, where they recruited from Canada, interestingly, Alan Luke and Carmen Luke. And they also brought in Pam Gilbert, Bronwyn Davies, Mary Casantas, Michael Singh, Eric Wilmot, and that for a period really flourished in Australia. Indeed, in Australia, you'll see a curriculum which is very much influenced by people interrogating the texts that they read in terms of some of these, through these feminist lens, through this Marxist lens, and through other lenses as an integral part of the school curriculum. Or critiques of what's going on in education, particularly more recently by people like Barbara Coomber. And so, in a sense, in Australia, the sociology of education, particularly adopting this critical lens, I think has really flourished in ways which has had an influence globally. It's probably impossible to talk more fully about it at this point in time, but what I'd like to do in the last segment is move from talking about these developments as I have to sort of taking a step back and to the side a little bit and looking to see what are the strengths, but I would also say the limitations that we're faced with in this socio-cultural political time, which involves this sort of mixture of the social turn and the critical turn.